prosecution for seduction. So in a way, when we laugh about the old ball and chain and marriage as a kind of prison sentence, it's only half funny because they understood it to be true.
But ultimately, it's almost like women didn't have a say in this.
So that is certainly true. I mean, but I also think you have to understand this. For a woman to have been sexually compromised, to no longer be a virgin at a time when virginity was necessary for most men to get married, she would have had no other marriage prospects. So while she may not have had a choice, it might have been the choice she wanted, because marriage was the epic of her life. To get married was to have economic sustenance, to have an opportunity for children, to be respectable. So she didn't want to be outside of that. And so this was a not great option, but it might have been the only option she had.
You mentioned some of the economic advantages of marriage. Do you believe that child marriage is incentivized when it comes to economics, tax breaks, health insurance?
Well, I think certainly in situations where parents are in limited straits and they may have the opportunity for a child to be with an older partner, there is an incentive to get the child off of your household ledger and onto someone else's. It may be an opportunity for the child as a spouse to have health insurance if the other person has health insurance. There might be tax consequences that could be advantageous. I don't think anyone sets up these systems with the idea that they are incentivizing child marriage, but as with any system, there certainly might be unintended consequences that could incentivize child marriage.
Why do you think a left-leaning organization like the ACLU was against raising the legal age of marriage in the state of California?
Well, I think part of it, I don't work for the ACLU, but I imagine at least part of the concern there was that there's a lot of interaction between laws that allow for reproductive rights and autonomy for minors that would be compromised if you raised the age of consent to marriage, because it would also perhaps trigger an inquiry about the age of consent to other kinds of procedures, which would be difficult.
Talk to me a little bit more about reproductive rights. How is that impacted when it comes to child marriages that we don't think of, maybe?
Well, so for example, understanding the relationship between marriage and procreation, I think, is really essential for this. So there are a lot of states where the age of consent for marriage is actually much higher unless the woman is pregnant, and then suddenly it's a different kind of conversation, maybe one where we allow for parental intervention or parental consent to override what might be a traditional age of consent. And so there is a sense that when a minor is pregnant, marriage might be a better option, again, an opportunity for her to be provided for and for the child later to be provided for. And so when you think about that, and then you think about the question of reproductive rights, for a lot of the same reasons, we have an age of consent to a lot of different procedures in order to honor the autonomy of minors, even in situations where we think that they might benefit from the additional help of an adult. So one of the things that might be happening in terms of the interaction between reproductive rights and the age of consent for marriage is there may be a situation where if a minor is married, you might thwart her opportunity to exercise reproductive rights or to exercise her autonomy in that domain, because you'll have this other person who is more than just a parent in terms of being able to object to or not consent to a particular procedure. So I think there's a really interesting relationship there that is underwritten by the link between marriage and procreation.
When you look at the divorce rates of child marriage, something like 70 to 80%, is that statistic reason enough that there should be a federal mandate, do you believe?
So I'm not sure that there should be a federal mandate, in part because I'm not sure it would be constitutional, given that historically this has been something that's been considered an area of traditional state concern, and I don't know what constitutional hook would be available. The federal government, Congress, for example, only has a limited range of constitutional powers under which it can enact laws. So if it's a question of crossing state lines to get married, then that's something Congress can do because it implicates the Commerce Clause and the commerce power. But if it's simply, I just want to regulate within Georgia and within South Carolina and all these other states, that's not something that Congress can do. So I mean, I think it's really difficult to think in terms of a federal law dealing with this unless you're talking about state lines. I think what we could see that would be more plausible is a state-by-state effort to raise the age of consent. And you're seeing that in a lot of places, Kentucky, for example. But obviously that requires a lot more coordination. There are 50 different jurisdictions that you have to get in line, and they may all have different ideas about what an acceptable age of consent is.
Melissa Murray, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You bet.